Welcome to Connecting the Dots, a non-traditional legal program with your host and trusted advisor, Liz Myska, your guide through the web of life's dilemmas.
Welcome to another edition of Connecting the Dots. I'm your host, Liz Myska, and today I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming the newest city councilor, 2022, Etel
Haxhiaj.
Thank you.
Yes.
I've seen you from afar and have desired to get to know you better, and I just love this opportunity to be able to do so. So thank you for coming on the program today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Super excited.
I don't know very much about you other than you are Clark grad and now you're a city councilor, and I just learned that you have something to do with the Central Mass Housing Alliance. I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
So please tell me your story.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited to have this conversation. So I left my home country of Albania at 17 due to a lot of political upheaval, and crossed the border to Greece with my mom, my 85-year-old grandmother, and my dad, where we lived in Greece for a couple of years as undocumented persons until we were able to get picked up by the green card lottery. And that's in Greece is where I learned for the first time about Clark University. Through my guidance counselor, who introduced me to a woman who was trying to recruit international students to Clark. And why that was special to me is that, it was great to see that there's successful Albanian people in America. And secondly, I was fascinated by political science, and that has a lot to do with my story of my country of origin and all the political upheaval I experienced as a young person, as a young woman. And seeing how local government can be terrible, can also be a force for good. And so that was the primary reason I was determined to study political science. So maybe one day I could go back and make a difference in my home country. It just so happened that we ended up in Texas, where we had family that sponsored us. And I was very determined, again, to apply to Clark. The only difference is that this time I'm a green card holder, which opens up more possibilities for me to get scholarships. So I applied. My mom and my dad followed me. We left our grandmother in Greece. They followed me to Worcester, came here in 2001, and started as a transfer from community college. And that was really my first start into learning and loving the Worcester community, obviously loving Clark and all the things that I learned there. Got involved as one of my first forays into community work, doing community mediations and learning about being a mediator. I suspect that has something to do with the fact that I experienced so much conflict, that trying to mediate and bring peace and reconciliation felt was kind of much
more productive.
Much more productive, and just something that I felt, well, I have good listening skills, might as well use them for good.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's kind of how my journey started in Worcester.
Wow. Well, I'm just curious, when you came in 2001,
yeah.
What do you remember was what impressed you, or what? Yeah. The only reason I'm asking, I've had several friends tell me, living in the United States, they saw television programs, so they had this preconceived notion about what the United States was like.
Yeah.
And again, the Northeast, from going to Texas first,
right.
And then I'm just
quite a culture shock.
I was going to say.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think so. I remember just physically the first thing when I landed in Texas. My mom and dad left Greece a month before me to get everything started. So I stayed alone in Greece for a month, and I just landed into this huge airport and was so disoriented because it was so hot, it was so big, and so that was my first sort of disorienting experience in Texas. When I came to Worcester, it was interesting. So one of the things that I valued a lot, which is I'm glad that you had me on your show, is that I was used to walking everywhere, used to taking the bus everywhere, used to seeing people on the street, and I came here and I'm like, where are people? And so I took the bus to go to, I didn't have a car and I didn't know how to drive yet, to Clark for my first year and a half. And I just remember looking around and saying, thank God there's a bus, but why aren't there a lot of people in it? And I missed the feeling of community that I experienced either through public transportation, but also just seeing people. We walked everywhere. We either took the bus or we walked everywhere. Even in Greece was the same way. So that was very strange for me. And it wasn't New York, because that's what I pictured in my head.
Right. With the sidewalks being
the lights,
wall-to-wall people, and activity.
Right, the activity. So I didn't experience that here, and more so in Texas, of course, where you can't really take. I took the bus there too, but it was a different experience.
Right.
So that was probably the first thing, and I had never seen three-deckers, so that was a very interesting experience. But yeah, then I just got to love the city and the people, and still do.
So you majored in political science. You were volunteering. I'm assuming were you working while you were going to school, or what?
Yeah. So they didn't have. What I did is I fell in love with international development and social change as a major, and so I did that, and I did my master's in community development and planning. And part of it was because I love the idea of what community planning and building looked like and how the two intersected. And so while I sort of dabbled into community mediation as a volunteer, that opened the path for me to do a few other things related to mediation and reconciliation. So I ran peer mediation programs, both at Worcester Public Schools and then in Boston, in Dorchester. And then I worked for the Attorney General's office as a consumer mediator, where I got to really understand better some of the structural issues that consumers face, business practices, but I also love constituent services, hence being a city councilor too, among all the structural things that I love to talk about. And so that kind of opened the path for working around youth development, and then community organizing, which has been and is still one of my biggest loves as a new person in America.
Wow. Again, so impressive that it's like you're leapfrogging from one thing to another, and it's almost like not even from lily pad to lily pad. You're just wow.
And trying to figure out how this your program is called Connecting the Dots.
Right.
How do we talk about all these things not in isolation?
Right.
And so I learned a lot about that philosophy of everything is interconnected. Through a lot of the work and talking to a lot of people who are facing real issues in the community.
Do you find that, because it sounds like you have a plethora of experience, that there are factions of people, and I'm thinking about this in the blindness community, because it's kind of like the woe is me, oh pity me, but the type that will not pull themselves up by the bootstraps. They want to complain, they want to gripe, but when you offer them options, they're like, oh no, no. Have you encountered that in any of your endeavors?
I think the thing that I've learned about when I encounter some of that is that I think people are so afraid sometimes of engaging with city government because city government hasn't worked for people. And I know that sometimes is a controversial thing to say, but when people are disengaged, in my view, in my experience, is because they feel they've either tried to come up with solutions before, or solutions that have been proposed haven't included their views, haven't included their experiences. So they become disillusioned and disengaged because of that. And I feel like a lot of my role as a new city councilor is to bring that perspective into city governance, and to encourage people not to encourage, especially as elected officials, to understand the barriers to participating. And so it's not that people don't want to get engaged, it's that they haven't had the experience of being heard. or their experiences being validated. And so where are the barriers that I could help lower so that people's participation becomes not only exciting but valuable and not token? That's at least it's been my experience in community organizing, that it's a perspective that I'm trying to bring to the council every chance I get.
Well, your name also came up last year when you were running because of the Indian Lake Community Garden. So Carl Gomes, who has been on this program as well, he said that you, and again, this always impresses me, that you were lending your ear to, even though that wasn't your district, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
You were lending your ear to his organization, and he mentioned several times that that you had, and I'm not quite sure what your role was, but you had maybe attended a meeting or learned about his project or whatever. And again, you cited listening skills, and I think that in and of itself is huge because we don't listen to one another. We talk over one another. We want to inflate our own egos so that one-upsmanship. I said this, and that's why when you mentioned mediation, I took a mediation course, and I was very surprised by the I'm going to call it the cadence, but letting bringing the parties together. Yeah. But then separating them, letting them each tell their story, and then bringing them back in, and guiding the discussion. I mean, it's just so. It's not our adversarial system of justice where let me outshout you, let me show off. So I think that you incorporate that, at least that's what I'm perceiving. You incorporate those styles, which it will mean that people will want to be part of what your leadership of what you're doing, so that you in turn can say, well, I'm not the leader now, I'm passing the baton. It's not like follow the leader. I'm sorry, am I all over the place?
No,
here?
You're not. No. So it made me think about how I used to train young people in schools to think about the role of conflict resolution and teaching young people the skills that are so imperative to us resolving issues without a violent way or a punitive way. And so it makes me think about a lot of conversations around at least mediation, and that path for me, teaching it to young people and training young people on those skills makes me feel like it's a great way for us to have the discussion around schools and the role of reconciliation and alternative methods of teaching our young people how to resolve conflicts and training them as adults then to take that into wherever skill set, wherever workplace they work. So that's one. But in terms of listening, so one of the things that attracted me about Carl's project was around the walkability piece, which is something that, especially in those last few days, I've been engaging with folks on Twitter who have had a lot of experiences around how walkable our city is, especially in times. I saw a person on a wheelchair this morning, barreling down the street because the sidewalk wasn't safe for them. And then, I see these big cars that take very little care at watching who's around them, paying careful attention to pedestrians. I've been talking a lot about people with visual impairment who navigating the city, and I want to take that walk with you because I want to experience it myself, but who I think our policies, I'm not sure that they take their perspectives and lived experiences into account. The moms with young children who strollers. What I've been really concerned about, and this goes back to connecting how we talk about public policy. It's one thing to say that we're making all these changes, making our city walkable and safe, but it's like, all right, well, for me, that's an equity issue too. It's an accessibility issue too. And I want to make sure that when we're making these decisions, that we have all the stakeholders at the table, all the people who are affected by the quality of our sidewalks, and learning from them and seeing what they need versus us rushing to make policy without taking their experiences into consideration. And so when I learned about Carl's project, and he took me on a drive around the city, I feel like that's my obligation as a city councilor, as a policymaker, as an organizer, to listen and not rush into decision making without understanding fully the picture. And understanding how the people's lived experiences should guide our policy versus the other way around. So the walkability and accessibility and the easiness of our streets for everybody, pedestrians, the disability community, and I have to say too, there's a racial component to this. We know that fatalities, crashes, pedestrian deaths mostly impact communities of color and low wealth communities because they're the ones that have less resources.
Right, non-drivers.
And non-drivers. And so are we building a city catered to cars? Right. Or are we going to have a conversation about how do we collect all these experiences, bring all the people to the table, and figure out how to have a holistic discussion around any policy that we make?
Well, I can go so many places here, but let me just tell you, with Carl's project, which again is Indian Lake and his community garden, community literacy and teaching garden. I used to live on Tower Street, which is off of Huntington Ave, which is off of West Boylston Street. And when I had first heard about Carl's project through Walk Boston, and they were saying we're gonna do a walk around Indian Lake, and I'm thinking, where are you gonna walk? There's no sidewalks. What is this walkability? But so what you said captured that. I mean, it sounds great, except if you walk. And when I lived there, I was more able-bodied. My husband was able-bodied. We did walk, but on Shore Drive there were no sidewalks. So when through the aging process and I'm less able, it's like, well, someone like me can't walk there. So it is an equity issue. So to have it thrown up in my face as a taxpayer and the citizen is like, oh, we're going to make everything walkable. Well, but then you have to take people like me into consideration because I do walk and I want to walk, but it's going to require a much more closer glimpse. And as you said, my lived experience. So, and that's truly how all of my walking initiatives started. I live downtown now. I had moved there when I became legally blind, and I joined the YWCA, which we know is off of Franklin Street, and so I would walk because I could no longer drive. I would walk. I would come down Pleasant Street. I would cross Main Street, like in front of City Hall, and this particular day, it was a Saturday, and it was the summertime. I was using my white cane. They were setting up for an event in the Common. So strewn across the sidewalk on Front Street, on the Common side were, boxes and barrels. I think it was a beer tasting, cords. And as I'm walking, I am saying to no one in particular, because no one is paying any attention to the blind person, excuse me, because the sidewalk is my road. A pedestrian on the other side of Front Street hails me and it gives me an explanation. She says, they're setting up for an event. And I'm like, well, I could deduce that by all of the paraphernalia, but my passage is blocked. And so from that, I'm lucky enough to serve on the Commission on Disabilities here in the city, which is now called the Accessibility Advisory Commission. But I spoke to Jana Turchek and I said, I want city councilors, I want people to understand what it's like for me on a daily basis to traverse the city that I was born in. And that was the origin of the walkabouts, giving dignitaries, and the first iteration, the city manager selected people. So it was the traffic engineer who is no longer the traffic engineer, the head of DPW, one of the city councilors, a police chief, and I'm trying to think of and Matty Castillo was. So we had five individuals.
Councillor King, I think, still talks about that experience.
I don't think Councillor King has had that.
Oh, maybe it was a different.
Right.
Maybe it might have been a different.
Right. But so that first iteration, again, I don't just make people walk the plank. I'm not about showing people, like showing them up. But and we're not off-roading. We are on the sidewalks. But again, the sidewalks are cluttered with paraphernalia, with signboards. But also at the time, this particular time, there was work going on in front of the library, not the current.
Right.
So we had construction. We had all kinds of issues.
Yeah.
And again, the purpose of it is not only exposure, but just really dovetailing with what you're saying, Etel, that I want people to say, "Whoa, we're paying lip service to something," but in reality, people are not going to walk because they don't feel comfortable, whatever reason, because their access is barred, because there's no one that looks like them on the streets. There are no people. I am a walker, and I've always been a walker. And now that Polar Park is, in full swing, well, I felt like a salmon going upstream when I was walking away from the park last year.
Yeah.
And again, people were paying no mind to me, and it's like, oh, you have to pay attention. You need to pay attention because the sidewalk is a shared space.
Yes.
And the other thing that I learned as well, again, not to deride Polar Park, was in front of Polar Park, shared space. The sidewalk is shared with cyclists, and it's like, whoa! As a blind person, I don't know who's here. So it's kind of like redefining the rules of the road. The road being the sidewalk.
Yeah.
And that's why the things that you're talking about, again, it's mediating. Yeah. I'm not saying I have to have I have to have exclusive domain here.
Right.
But it's shared space, and it's different for me than it is for somebody on wheels.
And it's inclusivity. It's being able to say we have a community that serves and should serve all of us. And so in planning, in any community planning efforts, we should have everyone at the table to inform our decision making. So even something that you said, so last night we had, I'm the chair of the Urban Technologies Innovation and Environment Committee, and we were talking about the website. And so I had a constituent who called and said, have you thought about the fact that if I'm a visually impaired person, I can't navigate. It's not accessible. Right. And so I brought that up yesterday to say, hey, would you be willing to talk to the Accessibility Commission? Have they been included in any of this technology or innovative stuff that we're doing to get their perspective? Because they should. And so I'm hoping, these are the things that I feel I have an obligation. This is where my listening comes into play. Yes. And so if I am having constituents or anyone really just say, have you thought about this? Right. My perspective is not included. Maybe I'm not able to resolve it in the moment, but I should, and I have the privilege and the power to say, well, hold off on a second. Let's stop on planning to make sure that the folks that are supposed to be at the table are at the table and that they're informing our decisions. And so that's how I think I approach anything coming as a district councilor too. So if I am looking at around the district and I'm walking around, we did a mini walk audit with folks right before the election, because I wanted to understand from people's perspectives how walking the streets feels like, or where are some of the pockets of the people feel it's not accessible to them. And, that's where I feel are some of those experiential experiences that feel important to me to include.
Absolutely. Well, I am going to invite you.
Yes, please do.
Because actually, Councillor King wanted to do a walk audit, and I had offered this before the election because when you don't know, again, when you don't know, you don't know. And when you're looking at something, you're not noticing it. And that's what becomes very, very obvious when you experience this. And I just see a wonderful partnership here between you and me and the greater community, because one of the secrets that I've learned is people want to belong, and they want to be heard, and they don't have these opportunities. They're either hovering on the outskirts, saying nobody's listening to me, so what's the point?
Exactly.
I'm just gonna give up. Or they've trumpeted it, and people are like, oh no, not them again. So I think you being the spokesperson, particularly with all the attributes you have, my gosh, I mean, just think, if you hadn't spoken up, or if your dad hadn't said, hey, we got to get out of here.
That's right.
And just the tenacity and persistence, and as you went absorbing all of this this information and cultivating it, it's super exciting. I'm super excited for you.
Thank you, Liz. I appreciate it. And honestly, the walk experience that you're offering should be mandatory for all city councilors.
All municipal employees.
All municipal employees, right?
Thank you.
Like, that's a starting point.
Absolutely.
But that's something that everybody should know how it feels to be in your shoes. That way, all the decisions that they're making include your perspective and your lived experience. So I'm super excited. I will drag with me whoever needs to be dragged, and I look forward to partnering with you.
Well, thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you so much, Liz.
Okay. Join me for another edition of Connecting the Dots next time.
Please note that the information provided in this show is not a substitute for consulting with an experienced local attorney and receiving counsel based on the facts and circumstances of a particular transaction. To contact Lizbeth, email her at lizbeth@elizabethlmyska.com or call her office at 508-753-7681. We're online at connectingthedots.lawyer. Executive producers, Lizbeth Myska and Jack Peacock. Producers, John Medberry and Bill Hamilton. A production of Elizabeth L. Myska, J.D., LLM, in association with Compliments.
For every pound you lose, that's 4 pounds of pressure off the knees. To find out more, go to fightarthritispain.org